Good afternoon to everyone joining from India and yes, the other time zones. Good morning and a good evening. And it's a great delight to have so many of you log in for India's first virtual legal marathon on ESG's inaugural ceremony. I won't take much time and we quickly get into hearing from each one on the panel today. And to start, I would like to invite Mr. Alok Dhir for the welcome address. Mr. Alok Dhir is the founder and managing partner of Dhir Dhir Associates, a full-service law firm which is rated as one of the top insolvency law firms in India and was the first firm to have launched ESG practice desk in India. He's a qualified chartered accountant and a lawyer and has been practicing law since 1983. He's also an insolvency professional. He specializes in corporate and financial restructuring, insolvency laws, M&A, banking laws, and real estate. He is the co-chairman of ASSOCHAM's National Council on IBC. He has been a member of various committees appointed by the Government of India, IBBI, ICSI for formulating and advising on issues relating to corporate rescue, asset reconstruction, and individual insolvency. He is also a member of the Executive Board and Treasurer of Insol India. Mr. Dhir is a veteran of advising corporate entities in distress and formulating plans for their revival. He advises multi-stakeholders in cases that are undergoing the CIRP process in India. Mr. Dhir has been consistently recognized as a leading lawyer for restructuring and insolvency in India by Legal 500, Chambers and Partners, Asia Law Profiles, IFLR 1000, India Business Law Journal, Benchmark Litigation, India's Top Dispute Resolution Lawyer by ALB, and also the recipient of the Star Performer Award, Corporate Restructuring Firm of the Year 2019, Restructuring and Insolvency Law Firm of the Year 2019 by Golden Antlers, Acromic Point, and Business World. So we can't wait to hear from Mr. Dhir. Mr. Dhir, we would love to hear the welcome address from you on the event of the inaugural ceremony today.
Thank you so much, Sonal. I must just start by saying that you clearly demonstrated to everybody that I'm completely out of my depth. So all the specialization that I have in insolvency laws is really not something that ESG is all about. But let me just plow along and just give my 2 bits contribution to the ESG, to this event. So Ms. Cherie, Blair, Adam, Kalindee, Girish, Neeti, Lakshika, Sonal, our esteemed panelists, and the participants in the first virtual legal marathon. A very warm welcome to you. And I take this opportunity to welcoming you and wish you all a very good afternoon. It's indeed a proud moment for us at Dhir Dhir to organize this event with an effort to draw focus of our industry and business leaders to ESG concerns and impact on our business environment and collective society. Dhir Dhir is a full-service law firm, offices in Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, and Japan. Over the last 27 years, we've been providing legal services on litigation, arbitration, mediation, corporate advisory, M&A, insolvency and bankruptcy, telecom, corporate governance, etc. to top corporate entities in India and abroad. We have seen, and when we reflect upon it, we've seen businesses being focused on growth of top lines and profitability at any cost. That's what we've been noticing. There has been a race amongst these businesses to grow, to acquire, to profit. And in this race, they have exploited the environment, they have exploited human resources, followed all sorts of corporate practices and governance, verily with a very narrow objective to make profits and create wealth. The results are that in merely a generation, we have seen degradation, and I'm talking about India. In just one generation, we've seen enormous degradation of the environment at a very increasingly fast rate. The global warming, tsunamis, wildfires have devastated large land masses, and the exploitation and extinction of our, I would say, fellow flora, fauna inhabiting the world. Exploitation of the workmen, child labor, human slavery, human trafficking, burnout of young professionals at very young age, they are there for all to see. The earth, heavens, and sea have borne the brunt of this exploitive regime. Our air is polluted, it is getting toxic, we can't breathe, ozone layers are depleting, vast lands are laid waste, unsustainable agricultural policies, soil degradation, forest cover is depleting, flora and fauna are becoming extinct, and even the sea has not been spared. The ecological balance of the seas have also been disturbed. We have been doing mindless fishing, water spills, oil spills, solid waste, everything has gone into the sea as well. So, amidst this rapacious approach of profiteering, concerns of sustaining the environment for future generations keep cropping up. Against this backdrop, our industry has to transform. Thinkers, scientists, environmentalists, champions of human rights have been ringing an alarm bell. The planet cannot take anymore. As we recklessly move in pursuit of our profiteering goals, we are perhaps close to the tipping point beyond which it may not be even possible to salvage life. We owe a responsibility to our young, new generation of humans and other fellow flora and fauna who to live in harmony, in a balance on this Mother Earth, which actually belongs to all of us. In this background, the ESG has becoming increasingly important. ESG is not just an acronym for environmental, social, and governance. The three words ESG, in my mind, are sentinels, which are the conscience keepers and stand between us as a human race and complete devastation. A new era of business that no longer accepts running business just for profit is emerging. ESG is a catalyst for environmental transformation. And that is the real meaning of ESG as I see it. It has become increasingly important to generate awareness of the impact of our activities on environment, to monitor, calibrate the exploitation of resources and move to a more sustainable model of managing resources and not merely grabbing what we can. It has taken eons to create these resources and they cannot be generated in a lifetime. Very interestingly, at this point, as we all know, there was this advertisement for salt where they said that Ramdev Baba has gone to the mountain to get the rock salt, which is 25 million years old. 25 million years old. And what do? We just grab it and bring it out. And at a point of time, we are continuously depleting resources like this. We have to learn to utilize our resources maturely with responsibility and focus on setting a new cycle in motion for reprocessing, recovery of the resources, reutilization of these resources, rather than continuously exploiting them. We have to learn to respect human life and human rights, and more importantly, governance. We have to set up standards of responsible governance and to learn to live with them. Governance, to my mind, is like an ankush. It's a self-control, and it determines policies and principles which will help save our environment and eliminate human suffering. It's a time to take action. Against the backdrop of global transformation, standing by and doing nothing is not an option. We all have a role to play. Fortunately, we are in the midst of a tectonic shift in the thinking of business leaders who are now focusing more on responsible business practices. Now, a company to be successful is not merely that they should deliver attractive returns, but they should also make a positive environmental impact in equal measure. Investment leaders are transitioning their portfolios to carbon neutral investments, deploying capital with a purpose, and ultimately to create a better world. Sustainable investing is a catchphrase, and financial markets across the world are looking to sustainable investments. You may be all aware that in, I would only say 1920, because 2021 has been a washout, not only for us, but the rest of the world. More than $100 billion of green bonds were issued. All of this is reflective of the change. Now we are seeing newer technologies emerging like IA and automation. And there is a shift that we see, which is taking place. Let's say, for example, as against animal protein to plant-based protein, which is to generate a sustainable food system. The change in the power sector, energy sector, has been remarkable. We now generate more gigabytes of solar, wind, and water energy than the traditional thermal. Our business leaders are redefining and rediscovering the purpose of industry is to positively contribute to the development of countries in which they operate. And happy to say, India is at the forefront of this transformational change. As I mentioned earlier, SEBI has announced the new reporting formats for the top 1,000 listed companies pertaining to sustainable reporting, with disclosures which are focused on ESG parameters. While it is voluntary in the year 2021, in 2022, it is going to become mandatory. India has, during this period, been a signatory to various treaties. UN Sustainable Development Goals is one, Paris Climate Change is another. And recently, our Prime Minister, say with pride, was given the Global Energy and Environment Leadership Award by the Cambridge Energy Research Association. India has also in 2020 hosted a convention on biological diversity. I know that there are very experienced lists of panelists, and I don't want to keep my participants from them. But I'll end with a word to our young participants in this event. It's a tradition in India to light a lamp at such important events. Light dispels darkness. We hope that the light that is lit will lighten up the heart, soul, and mind of our young participants for protecting and preservation of the three sentinels of ESG and provide a better life to us and our future generations. We need you all youngsters to become the ESG warriors to ensure that the principles of ESG are recognized, respected, and acted upon. Because without this Ankush, we will not be able to leave this world as a better place to live in for our future generations. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mr. Dhir, and the great takeaways from the tone which you have set for the whole event. And at least I am going, for me, one word gets into my one line which you just said was ESG is catalyst of environmental transformation. And the way you have put the background about this whole youth Connect initiative, which Dhir and Dhir has put across to all the law colleges and try to integrate the industry stakeholders. It's a great way to celebrate the World Environment Day on the 5th, when the research lab will be in a live situation on that day. And the whole concept of ecosystem restoration, which you talked about, is what the whole, I think we will hear lots from all our distinguished panelists about the same. And thanks for setting that tone and putting the ball rolling. So thank you.
And I can't wait to hear the other panelists as well.
Yes, so we won't take time, and the next person is legal stalwart again, known globally very much, and we would be really looking forward to hearing her. She's no one else other than Mrs. Cherie Blair, QC, co-founder and chair of Omnia Strategy LLP. Cherie Blair, CBE Queen's Counsel, is the founder and chair of Omnia Strategy LLP, preeminent human rights counsel, and wife of former British Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Blair. Omnia Strategy is a pioneering law firm that boasts a unique law plus model, combining legal expertise with a multidisciplinary skill set across policy, diplomacy, intelligence, and communications. Omnia Strategy is a market leader in the field of business and human rights, and Cherie advises on corporate responsibility and improving and sustaining strong environmental, social, and governance standards. With over 40 years experience as a leading barrister, specializing in human rights, international arbitration, strategic international legal and advisory work, Cherie has represented over 30 governments, as well as numerous multinational corporations in international disputes. In addition to her hands-on role at Omnia, Cherie is also closely involved with various charities and is a strong advocate for women's rights. Amongst other things, Cherie is the founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, which runs programs to support women entrepreneurs across the world, including in India, and is also vice chair of the International Council on Women's Business Leadership, founded by Mrs. Hillary Clinton. So I won't take more time, and I would ask Akshay to connect us to hear from Mrs. Cherie Blair.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to join our friend Alok Dhir in welcoming you to this timely session dedicated to ESG trends and issues in India. Our aim is to highlight and participate in one of the defining transitions of our time, harnessing the power of the private sector to drive positive change for our society and planet, and building effective systems to deliver good corporate governance and accountability. I would like to express my gratitude to Dhir and Dhir for inviting Omnia Strategy to take part, to thank you all for taking the time to join us and share your insights, hopes and challenges, and to wish you all a productive session. To the students taking part in the 24-hour Research Lab Marathon, I commend the perspectives, passion and purpose, not least the stamina, that you are bringing to this important endeavour. While we, of course, look forward to your future leadership, we all know that the time for action is now, and we welcome your vital contribution now. Let me also express my solidarity with everyone in India as you endure this especially difficult time. While I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to meet remotely, even while continuing to tackle this awful pandemic, I look forward to returning to India and seeing some of you in person before too long. It's not difficult to find good reasons to travel to India, as well as your country's beauty, heritage and culture, and your geopolitical and economic importance. Omnia Strategy is a member of the Indian government's panel for investor-state disputes. In fact, earlier this year, we hosted a 3-day online training course for Indian state advocates on international arbitration, a topic close to the heart of our esteemed panelist, Neeti Sachdeva. We are glad to be working with Dhir and with corporates and other stakeholders in India who recognise the importance of ESG advice, representation and action. So it's fair to say India is very much on my mind. We have a fantastic panel of experts ready to explore some of the key trends, risks and opportunities in this area. Now, it's my pleasure to share a couple of reflections based on 45 years of advising, representing and observing in this field. First, recourse to human rights is transforming from the preserve of a few eccentrics like me to a mainstream foundation of legal policy, analysis and advocacy. There's never been a greater awareness of human suffering and the scale, pace and effects of environmental degradation. We also know more about the myriad ways in which we contribute to these harms through our choices as governments, businesses, investors, consumers and more. COVID-19 continued to show how we may all be in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. That we must build back better has been a key refrain of the last year. We also face a crisis of trust in institutions and experts. Trust in the conventional information sources is at a record low, and trust in all sectors assessed has declined. This has roots in the failure to share the values created by globalization, to address sustainability challenges, and to tackle other societal problems with collaboration and honesty. Work is underway to realign our economic system towards stakeholder capitalism. Human rights is becoming a lodestar for policy, a normative framework for business strategy, a tool for legislation, and a standard for resolving sensitive disputes. Against this backdrop, it's very good to see the offering from Lex Witness, our sponsor, and its focus on ESG in particular. Second, we are witnessing an explosion in new human rights obligations on business. As well as observing World Environment Day in 2 days' time, this month we mark the 10th anniversary of the unanimous endorsement by the UN Human Rights Council on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The UNGPs outlined the corporate responsibility to respect human rights. Put simply, businesses should avoid causing or contributing to adverse human rights impacts, and should seek to prevent or mitigate such harms to which they are directly linked. They should also play their part in ensuring victims have access to an effective remedy. Leading companies have made strides in embedding respect for human rights into their policies, practices and decision-making, and speaking out against some affronts to human dignity. But many have not, and voluntary initiatives have failed to move the needle. As a result, we're now witnessing an extraordinary flurry of developments in this area, including industry standard setting, shareholder activism, court rulings, and major legislative initiatives at EU level that could be a game changer worldwide, including for Indian businesses. But, let us be clear, this is and must be a global movement. Without doubt, it will both affect and be propelled by policymakers, enterprises and civil society in India. Indeed, the Indian government initiated the process of preparing its own National Action Plan, or NAP, on business and human rights in December 2018, when it released a zero draft in which it stated, "The vision of India's NAP stems from the Gandhian principle of trusteeship that defines the purpose of business is to serve all stakeholders." We will hear from Girish Joshi about the steps taken recently by the Bombay Stock Exchange, as well as from leading lights within SAP and Capgemini regarding the response from businesses and plans for the future. We must also accept that, as well as the opportunities to strengthen our business and manage their impacts on society, these times of ever-increasing scrutiny mean greater legal risks for Indian companies. To give one example, only 2 years ago, Anglo-Indian company Vedanta was in the headlines. The UK Supreme Court found in a landmark ruling that the English courts could hear a legal claim against the company and its Zambian subsidiary for alleged environmental damage in Zambia. I'm proud to say that Omnia was involved in that seminal case, and when I was in court, it was clear to me that our most senior judges were keenly interested to understand and apply the developing normative framework governing corporate responsibility for human rights harms. Vedanta settled this case out of court, and we have seen and will undoubtedly see more of these type of cases. After all, the law is a tool of social reform, and the calls for change grow louder day by day. This is an incredibly rich dialogue internationally amidst a fast evolving legal and commercial landscape. It is encouraging that this session, focusing on ESG in India, has drawn such interest. We look forward to continuing the conversation in the months and years to come. And now, thank you and enjoy the session.
The words which Mrs. Blair just talked about, I could feel that many a times Mrs. Blair did talk about that now is the time. And ESG, definitely we all know we can't be ignoring it more and more. We have to attend to it. And it's a global movement, multi-stakeholder approach. And I'm really thankful to get all those great words of wisdom on ESG from a stalwart lawyer like Mrs. Cherie Blair. Thanks so much to her. And moving on with the remaining part of the panel out here, I would quickly like to introduce every panelist out here in an alphabetical manner. And we would get into the panel discussion, hearing lots of, questions, answers coming from them. And also I would personally take you through some nice visual, description on what's happening in ESG before we just start that panel. So introducing the panel here, alphabetically, I start with, there's Adam Smith Anthony, who is the head business and human rights practice at Omnia Strategy LLP. He's a solicitor, advocate, and a partner at Omnia Strategy LLP. In this role, Adam advises businesses and other clients on seizing opportunities and managing risks relating to ESG issues. Adam was one of the first lawyers in London to focus his private practice on the field of business and human rights, and is a recognized leader in the field. Before joining Omnia Strategy, Adam enjoyed roles at a global law firm. At the United Nations also he was there, and worked in in-house legal teams of Apple and Google. He's a guest lecturer in corporate responsibility at University College London and is a trustee of a local charity in the UK. And as much as I have known Adam, is so much into policy writing at the European Union level in UK, and it will be great to hear him in the panel discussions, which will start in a bit. Welcome, Adam, to the forum. Then I have got Kalindee Mehta. She is the Chief of Staff to SAP's Asia President, supporting strategic initiatives, revenue-related activities, and customer success. Prior to this, she served as General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for SAP, and its acquired entities in India. She has about 20 years of work experience across diverse sectors like manufacturing, FMCG, investment banking, and has in the past worked for organizations like Lehman Brothers, Credit Suisse, Genpact, Conrad Rickard, mostly at the intersection of technology, law, and business. Kalindee has worked on a broad spectrum of complex legal, commercial aspects, data privacy, governance, general advisory, and strategy for all lines of business. She is married to Apurva, who is a software engineer turned lawyer, and is mother to 2 preteen boys. When not working, she loves spending time with her family, practice mindfulness, reading, cooking, listening to music, and lot many other things. Welcome, Kalindee, to the forum today. Then I have got a great person joining us today, Mr. Girish Joshi. Shri Girish Joshi heads the trading operations and listing sales of BSE, that's Bombay Stock Exchange. He has worked with ICICI Bank Group for 10 years. At ICICI Bank Group, he worked in various areas like ICICIdirect.com, Treasury mid-office, and in the area of regulatory reporting and monitoring at CFO office of the bank. He was also one of the earliest core team members who were involved in the setup of the National Stock Exchange, NSE. During 7 years at NSE, he worked in wholesale debt market and post-trade functions. He was also a member of Corporate Bonds and Securitization Advisory Committee, that is COBOSAC, of Securities Exchange and Board of India, that is SEBI. He represents BSE in Sustainability Working Group of World Federation of the Stock Exchange and also Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative of the United Nations. He has represented BSE in various subgroups formed by SEBI for market developments like EIPO, T+3 listing, regulatory framework for index providers, development of CBLO type products for corporate bonds, listing of REITs and INVIT. He has also represented BSE on the Secretarial Standard Board, SSB, formed by the ICSI, that's Institute of Company Secretary of India. Currently, he is also co-op member of Western India Regional Council of ICSI. Shri Girish Joshi, a commerce graduate from Sydenham College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai, is a chartered accountant as well as a cost accountant by qualification. Great person whom the entire industry would love to hear today on the take on ESG, companies, capital market, and lots of things. So most welcome, Shri Girish Joshi. The next one is, again, someone whom most of the industry knows, is Neeti Sachdeva. Neeti is the Secretary General and Registrar MCIA, that's Mumbai Court of International Arbitration, and also acts as an arbitrator. She is currently an office bearer at IBA Arbitration Committee also. She has extensively worked in the field of international commercial arbitration, both as a private practitioner, representing clients, and as an administrator facilitating the dispute resolution procedure. Neeti's past professional experience includes working with some of the top Indian law firms. She has also worked at the International Arbitration Department of Freshfields, Procas Deringer Paris office, besides being judicial clerk for Justice Geeta Mittal and Justice Muralidhar of Delhi High Court. She is also very active in the academic circle and as an academic advisor at KIIT Law School, Orissa. Neeti is also guest faculty at HLNU, Raipur, and National Law University, Delhi. So that's a very interesting profile, and I'm very sure in the very build-up of this whole session, people would like to hear about what is on arbitration and its future. And then we have very interesting speaker, Lakshika Joshi. Lakshika is the global IP lead and part of the legal leadership team at Capgemini Engineering. She has worked across sectors ranging from fintech, newspapers, books and guides, music, films, media and entertainment, IT, software to healthcare and wellness. She has received various national and international recognitions for her contributions, both as a general counsel and an IP professional. She is industry faculty, IPR at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and the Susma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Studies. Lakshika describes herself as a student forever. And one thing I could be saying of having known Lakshika, she's always so enthusiastic, passionate about airing views in the legal industry, and we all just love hearing her. So thanks, Lakshika, for joining in. And before I could just get the panel moving, just 5-7 minutes for some of the visuals which I wanted to take with the entire participant group today. So Akshay, if we can have the slides, please. Yeah. So if you see, today is the inaugural ceremony of this unique 24-hour ESG research lab, the legal marathon, and the numbers you could see being the first event. It was very well received with the student community, thanks to the deans, the colleges, of getting those nominations in. And we have some interesting, you say, research projects for each individual who is shortlisted to take them up and try to understand ESG far more closely. I know 24 hours is not a very long time, but definitely there is a whole set of 30, you say, winners which will emerge, the best submissions, who would get an opportunity to intern in the ESG practice at Dhir Dhir. So that would be great. We are looking all forward to it, starting 9 a.m. tomorrow, continuing until 5th of June. So yes, the next slide is something I would say, thanks to all the news outlets in the country to have seen value in this whole unique concept of a 24-hour research lab on ESG. This just proves in what we were talking in the first half of discussions today, that the chatter is there and ESG will be very, very important for every stakeholder in India INC. So thanks to all the media news outlet to have given the required recognition to the innovative concept, and we look forward to continuing year on year with more, you say, interesting things. And as this whole event is towards celebrating the World Environment Day, and this event is registered as an event for the celebrations of World Environment Day. 2021 to 2030 is an ecosystem restoration. These are some visuals I just wanted to put in, that what we are missing. And we need to go into that zone of after restoration. If we move forward, the next slide, please. If we see this graph and the temperature increase happening due to climate change, environment, we all need to be thinking lots behind every activity which we do. If in 2050, if you see, we go up to a 6 to 7 degrees centigrade increasing, life will be really in trouble. We just need to reflect, and I think this nature of data helps us reflect and be more passionate about doing our bit to save the planet Earth. And with this Youth Connect initiative, we know all the to-be young lawyers will be completing their degrees and can make huge difference to lawmaking, policy making as lawyers, and bring a change, and we are far more better than what is being expected over the next 10 or 30 years time frame. And if we move to the next slide, 10 years. We need to start doing the act so the control happens and it doesn't become an impossible job to restore it for the whole century. And if we go with some of the Sustainable Development Goals around ecosystem restoration, which we could see on the coming slide. It's all interrelated. Leadership is needed. Capacity building would be required. The next generation will be very much important. And I know over the last 2-3 years, we have seen lots of young activists after that speech of Greta Thunberg. It inspired a whole new generation to start talking on climate change. And they are making the difference. There will be behavioral shifts. The finance restoration process will kick in. And a culture of restoration will have to seep in to achieve this whole mega goal over the next 10 years. And this cannot be a tick box exercise. Every company, individuals, a multi-stakeholder approach, which we heard from both our speakers at the start. They are they both are the best names in the legal industry, and it needs to happen. And the youth will be very much be responsible for it. And if you could just see some of the SDGs, which can be really objectively, we can work and look upon. Yes, the next slide. If you see on ecosystem restoration, these 9 SDGs stand out, though all 17 are equally important. But when we are just talking on ecosystem restoration, and in addition to this, they are global performance standards set up as per UN Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosures, TCFD, the GRI, Equator Principles there, SASB is there, and we have the CDP having its own performance standards, IFC having it, and it's an interplay. It depend on the industry, the subsector, and how much, what can we do to achieve with baby steps moving forward in a planned manner for a year, 3 years, 5 years, and a 10-year goal. And definitely, we protect the planet, we protect the people. Moving to the next slide. If you see, this is again a very nice verified source information. It's not an impossible job. That fully we can recover our native ecosystems. We have to, it's very nice, reduce, improve, repair, initiate, then go to a partial situation and then fully. Efforts need to happen on an everyday basis in a multi-stakeholder approach. And if we further go into the slides, the next one, it's just a case study around the banking industry I picked up from one of the nice research reports. The challenge will happen with increasing temperature. We would see a real estate market collapse in low-lying areas, or with the water increase, sea levels are increasing. Those are type of risks which is bound to happen. At the same time, there's opportunity on, you say, financing a whole green agenda. And I know we all have been hearing on electric vehicles, cutting down on the fossil fuels, and those actions are happening. And India did sign the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. And if we see in the last 5, 7 years, 6 years, the amount the government and the private and the public sector companies have moved ahead on renewable energy. The speed at which things are moving is really big, great, which 20 years before we wouldn't have thought about, or 10 years before. So change is happening, and we have to embrace this change with the ESG lens. On the next slide, please. Yes, and as lawyers and coming from the legal fraternity, we could talk about lots of important things which happened in the first half of 2021, but 5 things which stand out to see that the policymakers, the stock exchanges, everyone is really getting more keen on ESG alignment. We saw a pilot rollout of TCFD recommendations for a few FTSE listed companies, and by 2025, every FTSE listed company would need to be in that zone. We did see that there was, in the EU markets, things did come in, and we see the first rollout 10th March, that it did happen, and the second rollout would happen in a few months. We saw a great, even during pandemic, each country, we were all struggling, but I would say 40 global leaders got together onto that virtual leaders summit on 27, 28 April 2021. That fine, we are in our own problems, trying to save our own populations. We still want to bring forth what on climate change commitments are we doing. Joe Biden did join it, and there was, I know, in US, that's come back to the whole climate change talks. And we saw all the 40 leaders give their commitment, and the wordings were very clear that it needs to be done on a proactive basis. Time is running out. We saw in India, 27 March, the first announcement on the ESG alignment came from our stock exchange regulator, SEBI. And 10th May, when we saw that detailed document with an extra 1 and 2, it's almost a 75 page document. And there's lots of things which are coming from the ESG principles for company now to move and transition, as Mr. Alok did speak about, from into a business responsibility and sustainability reporting culture. That was again a great top 5 things. And we were, I think many of people across the globe, we were expecting in June 2021, the directive on human due diligence in EU coming, but it seems to be pushed off for a few months, but one is sure it cannot be pushed off forever. So things are happening in the first half of 2021 already, and it's impacting the companies. The next slide, please. Now this again from a research report. If you see between 2020 to 25, in the EU, we are seeing real lots of things happening on the ground in the European banking space. There's lots of talk on the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. And this activity, this urge to have the right policies and have a multi-stakeholder approach with regulators, companies, society, we will be seeing more in the coming years in every part of the globe. Yeah, on the next slide, please. So get on. Just some figures, numbers to see that it does help to get onto the ESG. The next one is the commitments which we as a country have. And I think under the leadership of the Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, it looks we're going fairly good as compared to many other countries. And the next slide. Yes, some of the things which in India already in play on the whole restoration process. And it's just that how many of us get aware about it and become involved in it for those change. Yes, I think we are through, and now I think we can get the panel started. Adam, Lakshika, Kalindee, Neeti, Girish, very, very welcome. And I know I took a bit of your time to get the panel started. I just thought some visuals do help in aligning with the topic which we were talking on, our research lab, our eco-restoration, and the World Environment Day. And just a couple of things which for everyone I would like to put in. Any queries you have when you are hearing to our esteemed speakers, do put it on the chat box so that at the end of the panel, we can take them up so we don't break the rhythm of speaking for any of our esteemed panelists. And all the views represented in this forum would be primarily their own individual views. So that disclaimer I do put in. And yes, it's great to start. And I think I would just take my first question to Kalindee. Welcome. And Kalindee, I know you have been into so much of things in your career over the last 20 years. And as a lawyer, you have been at intersection of technology, law, the business part, and currently with your new role, what is the relevance of ESG for a company's growth journey?
Right. So thanks, Sonal, for first having me. Here I'm like learning from all the speakers, and I'm sure there's a lot to learn more. What you presented was definitely eye-opening. And thanks for hosting this session because there's so much awareness which is required on these topics. These are not just something which is relevant only from a regulatory perspective, but I think it's going to impact everybody, like each human being, each animal, each plant. So if we don't take care about the environment and our Mother Earth now, it's going to be too late even to start thinking maybe 2 years down the line. So much relevant, and so happy that we are starting this whole marathon the way you've titled the concept for the webinar today. So I think if I have to talk about the relevance of ESG, and if I can just talk about what we do. So these days, business organizations are not just expected to earn revenues, right? I mean, we are required to ensure that we remain relevant for our employees, customers, suppliers, and the larger ecosystem. And we did a short survey, at SAP to check what does sustainability resonate, and why should this be as part of our purpose. And 94% of our employees expressed that it's going to be very essential for us to pursue sustainability and to create a positive impact. And that's where it's at the very core of our purpose, and the reason why we are into the business, and why we feel motivated to come and do whatever we are doing in our respective roles every day. So if we look at I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going back to my organization, but I really love the very vision statement, and it says that our purpose is to help world run better and improve people's lives. So we try to serve through coming up with technology, coming up with solutions that help people improve their lives. We believe automation is really important because it gives time back to people to enjoy, their personal life, rather than sitting and doing what they would otherwise, do manually. So if I have to talk about sustainability, I think it's something which is really required in creating positive impact to economies, to environment, to our societies, and to aspects beyond planetary boundaries. Now, how can a company work on these areas? So I think there are two approaches to it. One is you being an enabler, where you positively influence your entire ecosystem, like your customers, your partners, your suppliers, by ensuring that their procurement processes are something that resonate with what sustainability stands for. They have enough diversity, with respect to the societal norms. They are ethical, and they follow a very strong governance mechanism, which will so it motivates, and it furthers the cause. The second way could be leading by example, right? So you yourself, before preaching the aspects that I spoke about, you try to follow the same, and then you influence your ecosystem. So one is the enabler way, the other one is the exemplar way. And I think SAP follows both. So we really try to make sure that we work with entities and organizations who have more sustainable approaches, rather than somebody who's very monochromic. And as an organization, SAP has committed that we are going to be carbon neutral by 2023. We were earlier making this pledge for 2025, but we realized that it's so much important, and even the 2 years is going to make a significant impact on the entire temperatures that the worlds are going to see the change. And you showed a slide on that, which was quite showcase of that very point. And we are committed to follow the United Nations Sustainable Goals. I think you covered that also as part of the common global framework. Now, if each of the organization were to believe that this is the truth, and together we can transform industries, grow economies, lift societies, sustain environment, leveraging different technology and solutions around climate action, work on the circular economies, we are definitely going to make some impact in the world that we live now, and will leave a better planet for our next generation. So talking about ESG, I think, E for environment, S for societal obligations, and G for the overall governance. Now, I think we have seen that, there's a very beautiful circle of goodness emerging, with the link from one to the other to the third. And if I can just spend a minute talking about that. So E stands out environment. Environment today is carbon emission, towards neutrality, trees plantation, mangrove restoration, cleaning of rivers, oceans, like prohibiting single-use plastic, etc. And I think the list is endless. These are true, a lot of companies are wanting to go from carbon, carbon emitting to carbon neutral to eventually creating a positive, like a green zone or a green token kind of a level. Along with this, I think it's important to ensure that you're also reducing the waste which is generated by the business processes. We may not realize, but even as a software company, the carbon emission that we have, the energies that we use, it is somewhere creating some form of waste, right? So this whole waste management, I think, leads to the concept of circular economy, where you try to reuse, recycle, refurbish your resources to ensure that what you are leaving ultimately the planet to absorb is at the minimal level. And I believe that the circular economy is also very helpful to the society, because it helps in creating more employment, in ensuring that the society also at large becomes conscious of not using the resources that we have. You can afford it, but can you create it is something that it goes on. So I think we love this concept of circular economy, and we are trying to see how we can help with support of our customers, partners, and the ecosystem. Like a lot of a lot of soft drink manufacturers have the plastic bottles, like you talk about the Pepsis and the Cokes and the likes. So how can you use those plastic bottles? How do you use the discarded rubber tires of a car? How do you use the waste which is generated by the fashion industry in terms of fabric, colors, everything? We believe that the S for society will eventually lead to your social responsibilities in terms of giving back, investing in communities, sharing knowledge, bringing about diversity and inclusions, having structures that remove unconscious biases, being more acceptable and more tolerant towards somebody who may not look or talk like you, or who may not behave like you, right? I mean, when we look at the disputes going on, or we recently witnessed something between Israel and Gaza. We are watching that playing out in our country between religious communities. So how do we remove unconscious bias? I think at some point in time will also lead to those points within the S of the society.
Aspect, Kalindee, the depth which you were talking about, and the interplay of the three components of environment, social, and governance can give the whole picture if all are working in tandem.
Yes. So I think, if you are using technology, you will be able to, work seamlessly on that, use technology to remove biases, make sure that your businesses are ethical, they are transparent, you comply to the regulations and the laws of the land. And, it creates a circle. I think, all companies and everybody wants to work with organizations, with entities which follow this circle in such a beautiful
That's
way.
a very important thing.
I can go on, but
yeah, Kalindee, I would say one thing which I really picked up well, which I am very sure that all the listeners are also did pick up, that word purpose, which you said the company needs to put in. Purpose, and
the
not
purpose.
company, the individual. That purpose towards ESG is something very much key. And I think to get some views from our attendees also, can Akshay, we have a quick poll on a couple of questions related around what we just talked about. Yes, so everyone, we have got how much? 15 seconds for a yes, no, which has appeared on your screens. Do you believe that today's youth would play a major role? And I see 100%, so not a single person in the whole huge you say in the audience, everyone, it's 100. Does your company have a dedicated ESG policy? We see 43% yes, no 58%. I think that's the starting point, the purpose which Kalindee just talked about. I think, fine, we close the poll. Yeah. So coming now, very, very important question from Shri Girish Joshi ji is, how important is ESG for Indian companies? You have seen all the sides, how the Indian, the whole capital markets, companies.
Yeah.
Please.
Yes, thank you, Sonal, and thank you, Dhir and Dhir Associates, giving opportunity to BAC. Of course, I will take less time because we have overshoot our budgeted time. So quickly on the Indian companies. Yeah, Indian companies, as opening remark, Mr. Dhir has also said, and even Cherie also said that ESG is a must for everyone who is there on the planet. So Indian companies cannot go away from this ESG. But why ESG is more important for Indian companies? Because ESG is there for every important. That's why this theme we are here to discuss it. And fortunately, it is all young legal professionals are connected, and they are going to drive it sooner or later on various policy measures. Now, looking at the Indian companies which are listed on stock exchange BSE, so we have two, equities are listed and bonds are listed. And recently there was when the market is going every day now and high. So we have reached almost USD 3 trillion market cap of equity listed. And as far as debt or bonds which are listed on Bombay Stock Exchange, they are around USD $345 billion. Okay. Now this is the spectrum of the market. In this, our Indian companies are operating. I'm just telling you, we have only 5,000 listed companies. But we have but if you look at, there are there are many companies which are not listed. And all of you legal professionals are also advising and are in touch with those companies which are not listed also. So whether you are listed or not listed, still you have to follow those ESG principles which we are discussing. Now, again, coming to the same aspect, why it is more important for Indian companies? Naturally, because you have to make disclosure. We are listed on stock exchange. So you have to make disclosure, and disclosure are being watched by so many people. So, and now Indian companies are also, as Kalindee also said, we have so many stakeholders. We have government organizations, state, central, local authorities, shareholder and owners are important stakeholders, and vendors and customers, which it touch upon very well, that they also influence your business practices, and they are also going to affect, because the entire world is moving. You can't stay away from all these important stakeholders, and they are going to put pressure or influence you. So naturally you have to follow those ESG principles, and Indian companies cannot say, okay, we can't follow. Same thing with civil societies, lenders, whether lenders are domestic banks, NBFCs, or international organizations like World Bank, ADB, they also follow the principles when they want to commit any fund. Now, in Indian companies, as you know, we have to achieve $5 trillion economy, which we are having ambitious target. And for that, we need a lot of funds. Fund has to come either from domestic resources and maybe from international market. Now, for international market, I'll just quote some number. Before that, I want to say our market cap is almost 150% of our GDP, or almost it has reached 190% of our GDP. And it has to go further. Now, if you look at the, now these numbers are coming from the Bloomberg. So, total ESG fund, which is there, AUM, it is almost USD $38 trillion as compared by Bloomberg as of 2018. And in ESG fund, this is the fund which is coming from fund houses. They are going to give money to the Indian companies, whether you come with IPO or whatever resources. Same thing, the ETF. ETF is nothing but secondary market, where and there also ETF, dedicated ESG ETF are being set up by the global investors. And by the end of 2021, it is going to have 135 billion AUM, and almost 203 billion inflow is going to come on all ESG funds in the coming year. Now, this is the global fund size. Now, coming to the India, in India also we have so many AMCs which are putting money. Now, domestic AUM of mutual funds which are there in India, it is almost 32 trillion Indian rupees. Okay. Now, of that fund which are tracking ESG, a dedicated ESG fund, it is very minimal. It is only 11,000 crore. Now, of 32 lakh crores or 32 trillion, and this is 11. So it's a huge gap. And the way Mr. Alok has also said, and Cherie also said the context, everyone is going to go through ESG fund or ESG dedicated theme. And that the pressure is going to put our Indian companies. And that's why they also have to, not just because of getting money, but of course it is your moral and social responsibility also, because you are serving in India, you are also in Indian economy, you are also touching global footprint. So you have to follow ESG principles. And the important aspects, I just want to take different point here. As far as G is concerned, governance, we must congratulate our regulator SEBI. Our governance standards are much, much higher, but it is as good as in the number 1 or 2. I would say it will come in the top 3 standards across the globe compared to the many countries in the rest part of our rest of the world. So our governance standards are much, much superior, because thanks to SEBI, which has put a lot of tough standards in terms of governance, whether it's independent director, related party transaction, all this. Being a lawyer, all you people are aware of that when you draft so many agreements for your clients. But it only on E and S. And E and S, naturally, there is no global taxonomy. There are no global standards. Every country, every company will follow based on the circumstances, the geography, or the business model, business practices which are there. But they have to aspire to come to the global best practices, particularly environment, because this pandemic has created a lot of challenges. I think it was in the first and second gear. Because of pandemic, I think everyone is now moving on to third gear, and it will may, I would say, further move to the fourth gear. The way it is speeding up the pressure for environment, and that's the way even Honorable Prime Minister also committed. Yes, we are also committed for environment. So that's the where our companies will have to come up to the speed, and that's the where people like you all, lawyer professionals, will help the company which are those best standards and how to put draft into the agreement and practices which you enter into various your stakeholders. So environment and social aspects, I would say it is very, very relative. It can be have global and standard benchmark. Of course, there are some standard principles, child labor, gender diversity, those things are definitely there. But still, social values differ from, I would say, region to region in India. So we'll have different practices, but still every company tries to adopt the best one. And looking at, I think Cherie also said, what BSE has done. So I will quickly touch 2-3 aspects, what we have been doing to assist our companies so they start competing with the peer group globally. So we have come out with ESG guidance document, naturally, because BSE member of Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative and World Federation of Stock Exchange. So we get some inputs, and we have created an ESG guidance document, which is available on BSE website. We also entered into a MOU with GRI. GRI is also another global agency, leading NGO, which has its own standards on sustainability reporting. So we also do workshop with various companies. And of course, we were the first exchange which has come out with the ESG indices way back in 2012, which we were ahead of the time. So we came out with 2 indices in 2012 and 13. And again, we have one more indices on BSE and S&P 100. These are the products we have created. But coming back to your own first question, why it is so important? It is more important because you get long-term flow, long-term funds from the investors, lenders, which will be more sticky. If you are not going to adopt these principles, then flow of fund which may come, it may be short-term and volatile flow. And it's such short-term and volatile flow which comes to the company, particularly I'm down on the secondary market, but your fundraising, then such flow may create pressure on the entrepreneurs, CEO or management to give better and more performance. As I think Cherie also, performance, profiteering is not more important, what Mr. Dhir also said. So, but if you do good, so, and there are global investors, even Adam is also will have a lot of idea. They will give such long-term funds, which is not a volatile fund, and those funds will remain with the company, and company can, I would say, in your bad time, those investors will remain with you. Stickiness is created and gives a lot of comfort to the company for their, I think, another business expansion or policy. So I will take a halt here, and maybe we'll take further question answer, or maybe we'll, as in we move further, we'll take it further. Thank you.
I think this is what I would say everyone listening to today's views. This is the interplay, Girish, the industry wants. Lawyers from the exchange, other people coming with their thought process. And the numbers which you said itself speaks what can be done. The numbers, there's such a huge gap and room for things that it could be just going into a different direction if we do this whole ESG work with multi-stakeholder approach. And great to hear that. And I'm very sure everyone in the audience fully appreciated the views coming from you. And one important thing before I move to Adam, I would Akshay, we have the quick polls around this particular thing and see how our attendees respond. Yes. Would better ESG, 20 seconds, please key in your votes. Would better ESG landscape help companies more sustainable finance for their growth? The aspect which Mr. Girish was speaking about, and we're seeing 100%. So everyone believes yes, by putting things, there will be sustainable finance for companies' growth. And would Indian companies start allocating resources and budget post the May SEBI circular on BRSR? 85% say yes, 15 no. It's still early days, I would say. And the companies are assessing how to go about it. So that's great. So before I move the question to Adam, I would quickly like to hear a bit from Lakshika. We were talking about the Indian companies, how ESG is important. And I know, Lakshika, you have spent so much of time in IP and in the legal head positions, that valuation using ESG principles.
Thanks, Sonal. I think that's a multi-folded question. So I guess what we want to address is, I would actually treat your question as a double-edged sword, and I'll come to that, why I'm saying this. And this is not in context of just Indian companies, but I will take a much broader global outlook. So yes, definitely there is value creation. Just to share a little bit and perhaps drive some pointers and value back home to this discussion is a report published by McKinsey quarterly, where they're saying that sustainable investments will be actually tops of $30 trillion, in the coming years. And this is just to give a view on the kind of tangible commercial value that we're talking about, right? So there's huge business and there's value which is tangible and more measurable from the perspective of the boards and for the perspective of the shareholders and so on and so forth. But even beyond that, ESG actually links directly to cash flows. And this has been proved through research and experience and so on. And of course, our experience in the country may be slightly limited at the moment. But if we look outside, and look at the rest of the globe, there are 5 key principles it drives in terms of value. It facilitates top line growth, both in terms of B2B, B2C. It reduces cost in the long term. And there is minimization of regulatory and legal intervention. So that is also, in a way, an investment and also cost saving. Then it, of course, increases, and going back to Kalindee's point about employee productivity. So, you bring home that feel-good factor, you relate to those principles, you relate to those values. And the 5th key principle here is optimizing of the investment and the capital expenditure. So these are the 5 key principles as I see them, and how they drive value. But circling back to what I said about double-edged sword, for me, it's not so much the ESG that's driving value back home, but actually, if the company has the values, those need to be driven through the ESG programs that the company runs. And therefore, it's almost like a circle, you know. Maybe for many of the companies, we've seen that we needed the regulator, or let's say the Companies Act, to tell us to have diversity on the board. And that's when, you know, just for a check in the box, they started having diversity on the board. And now the regulator is asking them to be serious about ESG, or perhaps going forward, we'll have more such regulatory practices, and the companies will. So honestly, I think it's more to do with than just the rule of the stick. We shouldn't be in a space when we're talking about things like environment, social, and governance, where we have somebody rule by the stick or tell us what to do. It needs to be a value of the system, a value of the organization, and the ethos or the culture or the DNA of the organization that then gets driven through the ESG principles. And whether we're talking about sustainability, and I mean, that can be mapped through various things on how we drive sustainability through things that the organization does, how they interface with their supply chains, how they interface with their customers, what are the kind of initiatives they work towards, and so on and so forth. And of course, I mean, I'm not going to talk about Capgemini very much. There's a whole page, and for us, this whole initiative is linked intrinsically to the strategy of the company, which is where I see we should be headed. It's not just a talking point. It's not just a point which is sort of good to have on your annual book, but it needs to be intrinsically linked to the global strategies of the company. If at all we're talking about sustainability in the real sense of the ESG itself. So whether it is sustainability of the environmental programs, or we're talking about the social and the governance, I think just to sort of bring home the fact that we've talked a lot for many years now about inclusion and diversity and so on. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are statutory guidelines, there are regulatory guidelines, and I guess there is definitely a check in the box. But I really don't know how many companies in India are serious about bringing or bridging that diversity gap, or sensitive about those issues. We are not perhaps happy with just having a check in the box. We need to evolve beyond that, and only then we'll be able to drive the real value back home. So whether it is examples such as, let's say, a Unilever, launching a soap or a detergent which uses lesser water in South Africa, sunlight, which is the equivalent of the surf that we use here in India, you know. And there was, as per Unilever's own report, about 50% growth in the company's sustainable products business lines, you know, compared to the rest of the business. And this is significant. So coming from a global FMCG giant,
there is value creation. There is value creation for companies.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there is value creation, and there is also the company values that need to get reflected into all of these programs.
That's very interesting to hear. We'll again come back to you, Lakshika. Just a quick poll survey on what we just talked about. Akshay. For all the attendees, yes, it's on your screen. Next 20 seconds. Sorry, not, I would say, yeah, we can take it, I think. Okay. Fine. So now we moved is we had some things on the questions, which very much takes us to Adam on can we protect our planet without protecting the people?
Thank you very much, Sonal, and I'm grateful to Dhir and to Lex Witness for the invitation to take part in this excellent panel. And it's a good question, Sonal. And I would say that for a long time, environmental and social matters were treated entirely different. And this can be seen in international treaties, in national and regional policies and laws, in civil society focus, and also in the organization and delegation of responsibility within businesses. Everything has become quite siloed. However, the current trend, I think, is a reversal of this and a convergence of environmental and social issues. And this can be seen both in looking at how civil society approach this and also in legal and practical examples, and I'll just touch on a few. In terms of civil society, I heard the previous Secretary General of Amnesty International, traditionally an organization focused very much on human rights, social issues, spoke in recent years about his organization's need to move on to focus more fully on environment. And I run the risk of crudely paraphrasing the point that he made, but essentially he was saying that without an inhabitable and stable planet, then there will be no humans to enjoy their human rights. So not to kind of put a hierarchy, but certainly to say that you can't ignore the environment. Equally, and it's easy to see, for example, how environmental problems can impact on human rights. So rising sea levels, which Sonal, you mentioned in your introduction, rising temperatures, extreme weather conditions, all of these have a very real and very immediate effect. We're seeing that play out now. This isn't something that's hypothetically maybe going to happen in the future. Also with WWF, at the other end of the civil society spectrum, the World Wildlife Fund, a very strong focus on environmental issues. I'm working with them at the moment on a project focused on deforestation and the conversion of land. But this project includes human rights and social issues. So for example, the rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of local communities to employment, the protection of environmental activists, journalists, and human rights defenders. So I think those two examples maybe suggest that this is all very interconnected and very hard to take in a very siloed way. In terms of some other practical and legal examples that really, I think, highlight this trend, practically businesses are realizing that they need to be very vigilant for unintended consequences. Good intentions in one aspect can have negative and sometimes disastrous unintended impacts, especially when economic and business activity is spread across complicated supply chains and across international borders. 3 examples then, just briefly. Everyone's very excited about the move into electric vehicles and the reliance on long life batteries, but there's also a huge concern about the manner in which those minerals are extracted from the ground. So if you look at how cobalt is mined in the DRC, how lithium is mined in DRC, China, and in South America, there are huge social problems there, sometimes akin to modern slavery in certain places. And that needs to be addressed if we're to have a holistic improvement of conditions. The move towards renewable energy, and Kalindee mentioned, the need for this to sustain the electrical needs of modern technology. Well, what about how these renewable energy infrastructure is constructed? Is it made by workers whose rights are protected, who have a wage that enables them to live with dignity? Is the land purchased fairly, or are people cleared off that land and left to fend for themselves? What about the dignity of the people on those plots of land that are now being used? And Mr. Dhir mentioned at the beginning about big data, artificial intelligence, and automation. We heard again from Kalindee on this. I completely agree. These are going to be hugely important and impactful tools in fighting environmental degradation and looking for renewal. But we also need to, as Kalindee said, be conscious of unconscious bias, and there is a risk that these tools can simply entrench some of the discrimination that may be in the mind of those programming the tools without even knowing about it. So we need to be vigilant to that. Just 4 examples on the legal and policy approach to this. Firstly, Cherie mentioned the UN Guiding Principles and also the OECD guidelines for multinational companies. They've come from a human rights perspective or heritage, but now they very much cover environmental, and the OECD has dedicated guidance for environmental due diligence. There's an international concept which many of you on the panel and watching will have heard about, which is just transition. And that is the idea that we need to transition to a healthy economy, but that must coexist with healthy environment. And the process for achieving this vision should be one that is fair and should not cost workers or community residents their health, environment, jobs, and economic assets. And I think without addressing that, you'll get a lot of pushback from communities as you try to encourage environmental progress. We've seen a lot of change in the courts. Cherie mentioned in her opening remarks the Vedanta case that we were involved in 2019. That was before the Supreme Court in the UK. It was essentially an environmental harms case relating to pollution or alleged pollution in Zambia, but it was argued largely on human rights grounds. And in fact, our whole role was to help assist the court by providing an update on the international standards and norms around human rights and business responsibilities. And you've seen many other court cases which also have a human rights and an environmental aspect. Shell in the Netherlands last week, Total in France, facing allegations of human rights violations in Uganda. And beyond extractives, this is also touching other sectors, including professional services, shipbuilding, and I think the list will go on and on. And finally, new legislation and new requirements, which are imposing disclosure and due diligence obligations on companies. But perhaps we'll leave that and touch on that later if we have time.
We'll just quickly come up on the screen with one ESG quick poll again and see what the response on this ESG poll question we have. Yes. We've been talking about the whole circular thing, and we see everyone believes 100%. And second question was, yeah,
I can't stop myself from again to have water bottles, like instead of plastic, to make sure that we don't damage. I mean, we have something which we can recycle.
Right. Right, and I think the second point, very important for each one to take home, is continuous training in our education system on ESG from a very young age. And 97% people of all so many attendees say yes. It has to come, just like how we had, you say, a moral science subject, something around ESG to be from a young age. And I think many schools in different parts of the world have already started doing things, even in India. And we would see more good education training things to happen. And I know everyone's been waiting to hear. Neeti is there, and Neeti resonates with arbitration world. So Neeti, can we have your perspective about resolving ESG disputes by arbitration?
Thank you, Sonal. First, I must congratulate Dhir and for Lex Witness for discussing such an important issue. And thank you for inviting me and to think of arbitration along with ESG. I must say that to answer your question, I probably would divide it into two parts. One is going to be on commercial arbitration, and one is going to be on the investment arbitration front. Now, we all know on the commercial side that there's definitely a growing pressure on businesses that they have to include ESG related clauses in their contracts, and not only include them, but to make sure that they're binding and enforceable. We've seen a lot of initiatives relating to ESG contract clauses, like the Chancery Lane project, which resulted in the climate contract playbook as recent as February 2020. Then there was a working group of the American Bar Association business law section, which came up with the model contract clause to protect workers in international supply chains. Now, the question that comes is that how would you have arbitration and what should you be really doing about it? We all know that arbitration clauses are a common feature in contracts, commercial contracts involving sectors like infrastructure, construction, energy, natural resources. And these are actually the sectors which are most likely to be involved in climate change related disputes as well. So in my view, it is very easy to involve arbitration ESG disputes for two simple reasons. One, you already see cross-border disputes, cross-border contracts having an arbitration clause. So all that needs to be done is to tweak your contracts a little bit to make sure then the breaches of such ESG regulations get captured within the arbitration dispute resolution mechanism itself. Secondly, I would say, which is even more important, is that we all know one of the biggest advantages we have always spoken about arbitration is confidentiality. And everybody would agree with me to say that, businesses would prefer to keep these kind of disputes as much confidential as possible because they can really have an adverse reputational effect on the businesses. So that's the second reason that it would be good to have arbitration of ESG related conflicts and disputes. I must tell the practitioners that for all of you who are interested, there are already institutions which have protocols, rules on it, and you may want to look at the Permanent Code of Arbitrations, optional rules for arbitration of dispute relating to environment and natural resources. Hague has rules on businesses and human rights arbitration. ICC also has a task force which is looking into arbitration of climate change related disputes. So that's very briefly on the commercial aspect of it. Let me now take you to the investment side of it. Now, investor-state arbitration, what we're seeing is that states are actually now turning towards investment treaties as a means which requires the investors to uphold human rights and environmental standards. And one example which comes to my mind actually is the Netherlands 2019 model BIT, which actually provided, and if I may quote, it said that investors and their investments shall comply with domestic laws and regulations of the host states, including laws and regulations on human rights. So that's very clearly outright there, an obligation. Let me come closer to home. We've been talking about India, and I'll not do justice if I don't talk about what we have been doing. In fact, the India model BIT, which though has been criticized on some points, actually directs the tribunals to reduce damages to reflect mitigating factors, which may include an unremedied harm or damage that the investor has caused to the environment. So it's not that the Indian government, our BIT, are very conscious of that. As a lawyer myself and having lawyers in the participants as well, I think I will fail in my duty if I don't at least mention a couple of cases for them to take back and read about it. On the investor-state arbitration, it is not that these claims are unheard of. Of course, we heard Mrs. Blair giving us an example of Vedanta. Adam spoke about some as well. But I would encourage students actually to look into these two cases which were purely on ESG-related misconduct, which was the 2017 case of Urbezer versus Argentina and a 2018 case of Avon versus Costa Rica, where actually the tribunal accepted responsibility of corporations and assumed jurisdiction to hear such claims. Let me just end on this point by saying one thing, which is that we all know, and it's not very unusual, that when the contracts are negotiated, dispute resolution clause just comes the last to be negotiated, or probably not to be spoken about as well. Just like today, we discussed everything and came to the disputes as a last question. So what I would encourage is that while we are negotiating contracts, let's be mindful of it. Let's see how we can actually make a robust dispute resolution clause, which would capture the breach of ESG regulations as well by arbitration. Sometimes a stick helps much more. I would conclude with that remarks.
That was very interesting, very crisp, and I will again come back to you for a couple of aspects today itself. I would quickly get to the poll, and yes, have you ever seen a dispute with an ESG issue? Everyone on their poll? Yes, a bit we see the yes and no's are tinkling. And while drafting ADR arbitration clause, do you consider ESG issues? Majority say, Neeti, you are right, 55, 56% no. So I think these polls in between were good enough. And I'm very conscious about the time that at 6 we had to, whatever, with everyone's consent, maybe we have a shorter Q&A. We can, I would really to have all of you here, if 2 minutes, even if I could get on some aspects which is there from what you had just spoken. So like Lakshika, you were talking about this value creation using ESG principles. How would you recommend balancing business requirement in a populated country like India and ESG fulfillment? Just a quick snapshot if you could talk.
Sure. And as they say, charity begins at home. So I'll first quote our own example at Capgemini, our Bangalore campus in India. We became the first corporate campus in India to receive a net zero energy platinum certification from the Indian Green Building Council. And, what we did was we put up solar panels on rooftops and created energy. This was, this campus was actually creating as much energy as it was consuming. So it was, equal. By the way, interesting fact is that during COVID times, when most of us are working from home, there was surplus energy generation, and we actually exported this back to the state electricity grid. So this is just an example of what we do back home. And this is within the corporate, but even at home, perhaps I wait till the weekend to club all my deliveries and order them all together so that I do not get smaller multiple packages of parcel. And that's my little contribution to sort of, make it more sustainable and support the ecosystem.
Like populated like India, and we still have to do our ESG fulfillment. Great point you talked about. Kalindee, do you see that how technology can support maximizing returns on ESG from what you spoke earlier?
I think I can bet everything on this question to be positive. Yes. So, very quickly, technology will help you to measure what your carbon emission is, right? And unless and until you measure, you don't know how to get positive. There are several ways, like, solutions available which help you to identify what's the most efficient route to do, to transport goods back and forth from a supply chain perspective. I think technology helps you to evaluate data, like live data, to ensure whether your business processes are most optimal, and do you need to make any change so that you can save some bit of energy. Solutions which help you to have, like, a software doing the first filter for your recruitments, where you're not seeing whether the candidate is a male or a female, what's the age, what's the gender, ethnicity, but you're only looking at the core skills. Of course, there's a little flip side that you are filtering basis what's written on the resume rather than what the real person is.
Pros and cons with everything. Yeah, but that's a
good... and the societal aspects, technology can absolutely contribute, and our studies show that sustainability is profitable. So people have this myth that sustainability is expensive. It's not that way. Once you get into that circle, it definitely results positive financial impact as well.
That's really, I think, good to hear. Now, coming to Girish ji, if you could say your take on Indian companies who are primarily MSMEs. There are a huge number of MSMEs in India. And how would they embrace ESG? Will funds access become easier for them if they are showing those attributes of following ESG principles at their workplace? From what you said with that numbers which you were talking. And MSMEs play a huge big lot.
Now coming to the MSMEs companies, as far as this business principles, business conducts or governance, their standards are also far superior, even big listed companies or big, I would say, large cap company or blue chip companies. But as far as demonstration of best practices, and I would say how to showcase to the lenders or investor, they at times lack that marketing skill. Of course, they have to gear up for that. And even they are not able to demonstrate at times economies of scale in certain areas, because these are traditionally family-owned companies, mid-sized companies, I would say MSME companies, and even big companies, which we call in India, they are compared to international size, they are also small companies. For them to show those best ESG practices, which are big multinational, big global companies are showing, it is very difficult for them so they can attract those global capital for their expansion or inorganic growth. But to get money from the domestic investors, yes, they are geared up. They can very well show their whatever best practice they are doing, because domestic investors do understand. They understand their business model and their practices. Only thing, governance aspect is very important for the small family-owned company. At times, a lot of interlinked transactions are being done, and that they have to demonstrate very well. If they show in these related party transactions, good governance is followed, then 50% battle is won. But I'm coming practically. Now coming to E and S, environment, social aspect. Here, at times, these mid-sized companies, consciously they are doing good practices, but they are not able to demonstrate, as I said earlier. And the environment aspects, sometimes what happens, environment, social aspect, the way in some limited geography where they are operating with one limited plant or one small plant in one part of India, and they have to also get carried away the local pressure of the local leaders. So that times they face some challenge on the social aspects. But environment aspects, our laws are very strict. So whatever they are able to comply as per the law, they are doing. Something beyond the law, which is very important, which even Kalindee also said, no, it should not be tick box exercise. And there, I think they have to come out. And for that, people like us, stock exchanges, like lawyers or other any people who are come out with some guidance document, and they can definitely scale it up. The reason for the small company is once they decide, they can implement very fast. They don't face challenge like big companies that so many people, you have to move so many people, and 1 or 3 months project becomes 3-year projects. For a small company, once they decide, they can implement within 3 months. So that's the beauty of small companies. If owners and promoters get convinced, they will implement very fast.
That's very, very nice to hear that. And coming on to aspect where we left with you, Adam, I would, with all your exposure in the Western world, what are the regulatory trends and how litigations are looking in the whole ESG space?
Thank you. Well, let me just take maybe just 1 or 2 minutes to outline the two main trends. I think one is the kind of mandatory disclosure of sensitive information. Most people in India will be familiar with the UK Modern Slavery Act, which really was fairly pioneering in the way that it expected senior executive committees and boards to sign statements describing what they had done in the previous year to combat modern slavery. And there have been other instances, both regional and national levels, of these kind of disclosure requirements, including at the EU. Now the biggest trend and the thing that many of the business and human rights community internationally is focusing on, talking about, is this idea of mandating or obliging human rights and environmental due diligence. This is having, in simple terms, having a sufficient, adequate process within the business to identify the risk or actual human rights harms, both within the organization and within the broader supply chain, taking action to either avoid or mitigate those harms, reporting on what you've done, and crucially, trying to facilitate an effective remedy for victims. Interestingly, both at the EU and at national level, these new laws are not only applying to businesses who are based or headquartered in those countries, but also to companies from abroad, including India, who operate or have some economic impact within that country. So a new EU directive could have a very direct effect on Indian businesses operating in Europe, as well as an indirect one, as some of your business partners ask more and more questions and expect more and more engagement on these issues. So those are the two big trends that I would suggest.
So we see that the current push, which was in June, we had expected the directive on human due diligence and business human rights come in. We see that by the year end, hopefully.
We're still expecting it just after the summer, but you're right, Sonal, there's been some interesting politics behind the scenes. The European Parliament produced a report and published a draft directive earlier in the year, in February, and that indeed was very expansive and would be very difficult for companies to get their heads around in the short term, although I think in the medium and long term it will become just the new way of doing business. But we wait to see how the European Commission will formally kick off this process, as you say.
Few months, so we could see some great piece of legislation and policy coming. And before we open the floor for the Q&A, one is a question which I would take liberty to ask Neeti is, can arbitrations be made ESG friendly?
That's like taking the bull by the horn, right? That you can keep on talking about resolving disputes, but what arbitration is doing. Absolutely. I would say two ways. One is, if you've seen in the last 1 year how we are doing arbitrations, is something which I can tell you as a practitioner of arbitration for 15 years, I never thought we will reach where we've reached of doing arbitrations purely virtually. We've had cross-examinations done, filings done, everything done in a virtual space. I just wonder, why can't we just carry on to do it? The amount of paper which is used, utilized, or wasted, whichever way you may want to look at it, is actually humongous in an arbitration. And I think we definitely need to move towards a paperless arbitration. And there was a wonderful article I was reading by Mr. Singh, this was on LinkedIn, which said that greener arbitration means document-only arbitration. So you, in fact, move away from doing, even cross-examination. Just file your documents electronically, resolve the disputes, and move on. I must say that this is not something which is completely my idea, but there is a concept called as greener arbitration. It was founded by an international arbitrator, Lucy Greenwood. I would request all of you actually just to Google her, put greener arbitration, and you will have a green pledge, which is actually, they've considered all the aspects of international arbitration from a perspective of practitioner, parties, institution, vendors, you name it, and simple actions which can be taken to make your arbitrations greener. I'm not at the liberty, this is my last point, I promise, I'm not at the liberty to disclose too much about it, but we at MCI are leading an initiative, which you shall hear very soon from us, which is a plug-and-play arbitration hearing spaces.
Wow.
And this is our initiative to say that we have to move towards a greener arbitration, we have to evolve, learn from our experiences, and adopt all of these things. So those would be my comments of what we can do in arbitration.
We will be all looking forward to hear from MCIA on the greener arbitration, what you're putting in. And
I have a question for Neeti and for anyone else who may want to sort of answer this. I mean, of course, we are talking of a greener, arbitration. But Neeti, is there a way that you're also encouraging more diversity in those arbitration panels, or that are, sort of selected, appointed, or how do you manage that? Is there a plan around that as well?
Absolutely. So not only at MCIA, but I should talk about globally. In fact, if you look at some of the leading arbitral institutions now, they are taking initiatives to make sure that while an arbitrator is appointed, there is always a consideration to have a diversity, not only gender, but race as well, location as well. And there is again an initiative called as an equal representation at arbitration. It is actually a platform, again, a pledge, which has been subscribed to by most of the major arbitral institutions, law firms, and practitioners. And it is, like I said, it's actually a conscious decision how everybody's taking. If I was to talk it, at home, which is at MCIA, In our secretariat, we have 3 women and 1 man. And I take great pride in that. We have MCI Council, where we are trying to, bring in more gender diversity.
So
as well.
are there incentives attached to this?
I mean, I would say it's more of a self-regulation and a self-initiative that the arbitration community is taking, rather than really any incentives attached to that. And also it helps us to, increase the pool of dispute resolution experts who can sit there and resolve your disputes. That's what I would say.
In fact, to share a note
That's
here,
helpful.
I will connect with all the panelists also on it. There's a whole network of, you say, a legal network of lawyers on sustainability. And very few people know about it. And it's a proper organization which runs it. And it's good. Things are happening across. And I know Akshay would be saying we have shot on the time, and we have got many questions from across.
Yeah, Sonal, sorry to interrupt. We have a lot of questions that are coming in offline and live questions as well, but I will sincerely take a few of them. Lakshika ma'am, there's a question in the Q&A box right on the top for you. This is related to Nestle. If you could please answer that, ma'am. This is by Mohit Singhvi. I'll read out the question for you, ma'am. In reference to Lakshika ma'am recently, what she spoke, Nestle has reportedly went to say 60% of its products are unhealthy, given these FMCG products are consumed by children and people without them being aware of such health hazards. How does this impact in view of an ESG policy? Does it impact companies, investors?
So I'm not going to be answering that in reference to any specific company. The question does mention a brand name there, but I am not sort of an expert, or I cannot comment on what that would be. What I understand from the question or the essence is that how ethical. So in my view, this directly connects with ESG, because if a company is engaged or involved in practices which are not ethical, and ethics forms a big part of the ESG that we've been discussing. Of course, in light of the Environmental Day, which is around the corner, I think our focus has been more on environment and global sustainability and other initiatives. But I think when we talk of ESG, we are definitely talking about governance and social impact and social connects that the company has with not just its supply chain and customers, but also the end users or consumers of the products. And this is revolving directly around the ethics of a company, which comes directly from values, and values then connect back all the way to the ESG principles that we've been discussing.
I see a hand raised by Adam.
Thank you. I thought that was a great answer. Also a good question, but I'd make a broader point that applies beyond food and FMCG companies, in that I think if you look forward 5-10 years, then companies will be challenged to talk about how their product design process meets their human rights and environmental obligations, and how their whole business model does. So it won't be enough simply to say, this is our business and now let's figure out how we can mitigate some harms. It will instead be a question of how is your whole strategy and your whole purpose aligned with what you say your values are and your human rights and environmental obligations. So a challenge, a really kind of fundamental challenge to all businesses, really, not just the brand that was mentioned.
Thank you, Lakshika ma'am and Adam. A wonderful input there. The next question that we have here is for Neeti. Neeti, I'll read out the question for you. If arbitral tribunals decide questions of ESG, which deals with public law, will the law of India allow it?
So that is what I tried to do. Actually, it's a very valid question. Like I said, that if it is going to be something which is a contractual thing, a contract liability, and then it is breached, then very well an arbitration clause is competent enough, and a tribunal is competent enough to assume jurisdiction. But if it is going to have something which is a larger impact, and that is what in the legal term we call as in personam disputes and in rem disputes, something which is in rem would definitely be outside the scope of the arbitral tribunal. That's a basic principle of arbitration that we deal with. And that is when the issue of investor-state arbitration also comes in, because sometimes the states may take action, or an investor may take action which will breach the ESG regulations, and then probably a state can bring in an action against the investor. And that is what we're going to look at under the investor-state arbitration. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Neeti. We have another question, and I think Girish sir could definitely share his inputs on that. Can you please elaborate on the concept of green financing and its scope in India?
Yeah, green finance, the concept is either, because SEBI also come up with the guideline for listing of green bond. So you raise the money for where end use is for greener purpose, or it is not causing so much environment damage. That is called green finance. And end use has to be certified by some agency or technical experts. That's the way concept it is there in international market. So any money where you say it is green finance, just can't say it has to be certified by expert. Yes, end use, what is the end use of the money, whether it be use any carbon emission is there or it's up to acceptable level. So that aspect is important for green finance. And in India, as I said, SEBI has come out with the guideline. In recently, there was a Ghaziabad municipality has raised the bond. It was a bond as per SEBI guideline. It was a green bond, and it got listed on Bombay Stock Exchange. And its inauguration was done by Sri Yogi ji. So green finance is happening. In the international market, green finance is much more appealing or more apparent in a way. But where I'm coming from, I don't want to discourage the green finance. There should be benefit for the company. Unfortunately, all the Indian companies which have done green finance, whether domestic or in international market through ECB or through bond raising, they are not able to negotiate for a better yield. Even you should be able to reduce your cost of borrowing when you are making so much effort. So your cost of borrowing should at least reduce by few basis points, maybe 1 paisa, 2 paisa, 3 paisa. So that benefit is happening only to few issuers in the global market. For domestic or Indian companies, they have to still get that benefit. But green finance is happening, and it is a new buzzword. Of course, there should not be greenwashing also. So that's another thing which investors are taking care of, that it should not be there. And in India, we don't have so much investors in India who are asking that no, it should be green finance and I'll pay, give you money. They ask for the same yield. So at least in domestic market, we should have some movement for green finance, which is so much apparent or widely popular, particularly after pandemic in international markets.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joshi. Over to you, Sonal.
Yeah, and I think with is there a hand raise from one of the attendees?
We've covered that question already, Sonal. We can proceed forward.
So
thank you.
I think it's been just wonderful, and I know we have shot by 15 minutes, and we could have had another 1 hour of hearing from each of our esteemed panelists. One thing goes for clear, a common factor I did see, though we started from 4 to 6, everyone was very passionate. And with that sort of energy, not only in the panelists, even with the attendees, it is still attendees in triple, more than in 3 digits are there in the room. They're not tired. They're loving to hear what each one is saying. And some of those anecdotes coming from, or the real type things on the ground coming from each one of you. It's just fantastic to have this very nice, mature conversation, practical conversation on ESG, the World Environment Day, ecosystem restoration, and thanks to everyone. Thanks, Kalindee. Thanks, Girish Bhai. Thanks, Lakshika. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Neeti. And definitely, it's the panel is we could have gone for another half an hour, 1 hour for sure. And to all the attendees who took the time from their particular schedule, and my special thanks goes to our Mr. Alok Dhir and Mrs. Cherie Blair for the wonderful address which the whole audience did acknowledge on the pathway, and things can be really done well on ESG. And lots of thanks to Akshay and the whole Lex Witness team in helping us to get onto the platform and talk about ESG and get India's first virtual legal marathon on ESG inaugurated. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we will definitely be in touch with you, updating each of the panelists, how the whole results of the 24-hour research lab goes, some of your expertise out there if needed. Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sonal. Thank you so much, all the esteemed panelists, and special thanks to you,
Girish
Mr.
and Adam.
D.
Thank you in particular for staying back till the very end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.